Are you recording video? Okay, so set it to surface, and we're gonna set this rate really high, but we'll cap the particle count on the actual particle object. So this will just be a really, really high number, just to pop out all the particles. But then that way we keep the same particle count consistent. So let's set it to like 1 million or 10 million. I don't know. Just press a bunch of zeros and press enter. Don't want any speed, otherwise it'll shoot off the mesh, and that would look really weird. So they're just gonna kind of emit,
Boom, just
and then
like,
yeah. We didn't put a limit on the particle, so we definitely have to do that, otherwise mine might crash. So let's try, I don't know, 100,000 to start with. So it should just pop them out and stop, which it does. It's kind of hard to see. Okay, so that's working. We can even set this up higher just so we can see them better. So now we gotta get it to stick to the mesh. The way you do that is on the emitter, we're essentially going to goal the particles to the mesh based on its UVs, which is why we had to lay out the UVs so they're all unique. The emitter itself needs parent UV. By default, my emitters won't consider the UVs. It takes longer to calculate when you do, but in order to goal to the UVs, you need that data. We also need to select the particles in the mesh and go to goal.
Shift select.
Yeah. Goal. And set the particle goal weights to 1 instead of 0.5. Like we want it to be exactly on the mesh. So if we play it, you'll notice it doesn't work yet. It's kind of doing stuff, but it's only going to the UVs or the vertices. And you want a more randomized distribution on the faces. So we need to tell the particles, because the particles are emitting randomly across the surface, but they're goaling to the vertices. We want them to goal from where they're emitted from, so you have to add that couple particle attributes. So open the attribute editor, click General, under Add Dynamic Attributes, and there's a particle tab. These are pre-made particle attributes that they don't include with the Maya particles because the list in the attribute editor would look insane. They kind of let you add them as you need them. You need goal U, goal V, and parent U, parent V. So what these do is goal U and goal V, you can give it a value between 0 and 1. And based on the UV space, it'll goal to whatever polygon is closest to whatever value you give it. So under here, if let me just add these real fast. I click add. Goal U, goal V, this is 0. You can see 0 here, and there's 1 up here. If you give it a random like value of 0.5 and 0.5 for the goal U and goal V, the particle will go exactly to 0.5, 0.5 UV space. Whatever face it lands on, it'll stick to that point. So what parent U and parent V do is it tells the particle when it's made where in UV space it is. So with that data, we pass the parent U and parent V to the goal U and goal V. Essentially what that's going to do is wherever it emits, it'll stick to. Parent U and parent V know where it lives when it first was created, and then we set that value to its goal value. So wherever it pops up, that's where it's going to stay. The expression's super easy. Just create the expression. Then you can just type it in here. Since we're already on the particle shape right here, we can put goal U is equal to parent view. So goal V is equal to parent V. So that's just saying wherever it's emitted from, goal to that position. Okay. So now the particles are randomized on the surface, and they'll stick to the surface if we watch his leg. So now that we know that it works low res, we can crank the values up. Since we were limiting how many particles are created on the particle node itself, I think it's 10,000. Let's do, or 100,000. Let's do maybe 500,000. Yeah, we can set this down lower since we have a higher particle density. But you can see there's a ton of particles in there. And we can crank that up if you need more detail. So next step, we have to create VRay Metaball. Create VRay Metaball. And here's standard like Metaball functions. These are kind of interesting because by default VRay won't connect it to this Metaball node. It'll let you have to connect it, but it's cool because there's a particle system and a negative particle system. So you can have one particle system be the Metaball, and you can have another particle system actually subtracting from it. So you can kind of do like a Boolean on it. First thing you want to do is click Edit Systems, select the positive Metaball set, and click your particle. Then you want to click Show Preview. And depending on the scene scale, resolution maybe needs to go up. There we go. So you have to increase the preview resolution. Obviously, the higher you, this is just a preview. VRay won't render at this resolution. It's purely for viewport display purposes, so you don't need to make it too high. You just got to make it high enough to make sure it's kind of doing what you want it to do. So you can see it's kind of chugging, but you can crank it up and dial in the settings. Probably gonna want some smoothing. So let's turn smoothing on. And you have to play with the radius based on your scene scale. This will average, this radius is telling it how big of a radius it's going to calculate the smoothing from. But if your mesh expands too much, you can kind of shrink it back down. So you can maintain the same sort of volume, but kind of smooth it out, depending on the look you're going for. So you'll just have to play with the smoothing values. The distance functions you can play with too to get different sort of more detailed effects. It's not too much of a difference, so you have to play with them and see which one kind of does the best for you. And the texture you can modulate and put a displacement map on, like a 3D texture. Multiplication means that it'll actually cut holes in there as well as pop it out, kind of like Swiss cheese. I think for this, you're going to want to set it to addition. So it never cuts in, but it always displaces out, which is more in line with how normal displacement maps work with meshes. So, yeah, hopefully that does it.